father, Edward Moshe Feiman, came to the United States in 1899 with his family from Russia. He was a year old at the time. He was the youngest of 8 kids. And his family settled in Canton, Ohio, and they were followed by other Feimans came from Russia and settled there as well. And except for the time that my dad spent studying at Ohio State University and traveling around the world, he lived his whole life in Ohio, and it was a long and colorful life. He first thought he would become a forest ranger because he loved nature, but as he was sitting on top of those towers looking for forest, decided this was not a great career for a Jewish boy, so he came down and went to dental school, then he went to medical school. He did some eye work in Budapest because that was the place to do eye research, and spent some time working in a clinic in India, curing people of glaucoma and cataracts. And after all of those adventures, he came back to Canton, Ohio, and hung up his sign and opened his practice as an eye, ear, nose, and throat doctor. It was hard in those days for Jewish doctors in a small town to build a practice, and he had a lot of time on his hands. One day he read an article in the Journal of Industrial Medicine that Henry Ford had opened a medical department in the Ford Motor Company. My dad went to Detroit to study the clinic, and then he came back to Canton, and he went to see the president of the Timken Roller Bearing Company. Timken is the largest producer of steel ball bearings. It's in Canton, Ohio. It's still producing them to this day. And he persuaded Mr. Timken that he should also open a medical department at the plant, and he got himself hired as the medical director. When I was, my sisters and I, when we were very young, used to love to go to the plant with my dad, call out his number, 1146, as we went through the gate past the security guard, and go visit with the Irish nurses and doctors who worked in the clinic. But I really didn't know very much about what my dad actually did at Timken until this past December, when I was in Israel visiting my older sister and her husband. And Donnie told me 2 stories about my dad at Timken that I had never heard before, and I want to tell them to you. One of the things that my dad tried to do in the early years at Timken was establish a blood bank. But apparently some of the white workers were very reluctant to donate blood because they were worried that if they needed a transfusion, they might end up with blood from a black worker. So my father brought the workers together and he said to them, if your kid were sick with diphtheria, you'd want him or her to have a life-saving serum. Of course, the workers said. Well, my father answered, that serum comes from a horse. And nobody asks whether the horse is white or black. The blood bank was established. There was a policy at Timken that you had to retire at 65, whatever your position. So at 65, my father got his gold watch and walked away from an institution that he had been working at for the past 35 years. He was not ready to retire. He had married for the first time at 50, had 4 kids. He had a lot of energy. So he did other things in his life. And about 12 years later, my sister and Donnie came for a visit. My father thought this is an opportunity to go back to the plant that he hadn't visited in the previous 12 years since he had retired. So he arranged for Donnie and himself to tour the plant. My brother-in-law is a mining engineer by training, and my dad thought he would be interested to see how steel ball bearings were made. Donnie told me that my dad insisted that he put on a tie. Donnie had never worn a tie in his life, not even for his wedding, and a jacket, and that he slicked down his hair with a little bit of Brill cream, and off they went to Timken for this VIP tour. At the end of the tour, their last stop was a very large room with a big table and a conveyor belt that was bringing ball bearings to the workers. And the workers were manually inspecting these ball bearings and separating out the perfect steel balls from those that had defects. When my dad and Donnie entered the room, my dad must have been talking because the workers near the door heard his voice, and the message passed down the line. It's Doc Feiman, it's Doc Feiman, it's Doc Ed. And all the workers stood up and gave my dad a round of applause. This was a unit for blind workers, some of whom had been injured at the plant, that he had created so these men could earn a living and take care of their families despite their disability. I thought these two stories said a lot about the kind of person my father was. He loved to help people, he loved to solve problems, and he was passionate about social justice. I'm so glad that my brother-in-law told me these stories that I'd never heard before, and I'm glad for a chance to share them with you.